In my life of playing with OSIBISA, touring the world with OSIBISA and different other bands, I also toured with NATO and the members. I used to work with Nicky Tesco, writing songs, doing a song, you know, just writing songs at Sony Publishing. One day, on my way to a writing session with Nicky, I saw Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney signing autographs on Oxford Street outside of Air Studios. And wherever I went in those days, I used to take at least 6 copies of my 12-inch disc of Baby Talk, which was produced by Isaac Hayes. So I slipped the record to Linda McCartney, and they took it up to Air Studios and put it on the front part of the record pile. This New York producer just happened to be producing a record up there. He saw my record, played the song, liked it, took it back to New York. And about a year later, I get calls. Greg, they're playing your song on radio, Baby Talk. He had recorded my song with a 17-year-old Italian girl named Alicia. And this was at a time when Madonna was really, really very high up in the charts and becoming a superstar. Everybody thought this record was Madonna because this girl sounded like Madonna. And lo and behold, I got a call from MCA Music Publishing, which became Universal Music Publishing. They wanted to sign me. They wanted to sign me as a publisher, as a songwriter. And they knew the song was going to make a lot of money. But I had already signed a deal for the publishing with the guy who put out my version of Baby Talk. So they bought his rights back. I said, I'll do a 50-50 split with you at source, which means no matter what country the song's a hit in, you can't take any more percentage off the top. Because if you did a deal in those days, if you do a deal where the publisher gets 75%, I mean, you get 75%, the publisher get 25%. It's only at source 100% if it's in the country that you signed in. If it's a hit outside the country, well, you may only get 75% of 75%, not 100%. So I made sure that it was at source, which meant no matter where the song was a hit, I would get 75% or 50% because I did a 50-50 deal with them. And they gave me a check for £30,000, which is amazing. And that song made me over £250,000, maybe 300,000 and counting. From there, I became, I had a #1 record. That's what I'd been working for all my life. And I still did some touring with OSIBISA. We were touring all over the world. We toured Australia, Sri Lanka, America, Europe, up and down the UK, all over the world. And I got offered, one of my friends was a singer by the name of Bobby Tench. Now, Bobby Tench was a singer-guitarist. He worked with Marta Ulaeto, and more importantly, he did 2 albums with Jeff Beck called Orange and Rough and Ready. Bobby and Gus Isidore, we all kind of hung out together in barns, and Bobby became another mentor, friend. We did a TV commercial once that was amazing. And Bob recommended me for this play about Jellyroll Morton. I had already prepared because I'd studied acting in LA before I came 10 years previously. So by the time that job came around, I was ready. I had to learn a 75-page script because I was the only one that had to learn the script because The other guy on stage was an interviewer who was interviewing me as Jellyroll Morton. And I would talk about my past life as Jellyroll, which I'm doing now. But yeah, so I played Jellyroll Morton at the Royal Court Theatre in London. And to me, it was no big deal. But I had an actor once tell me, Greg, you gotta realize that what you're doing, some of us actors would sell our souls to do, have a little respect, man, So, I mean, it was an enormous, privilege for me, an African-American born in Memphis, raised in Riverside and Memphis, to come to London and play on one of the most prestigious stages and play someone from my culture, Jellyroll Morton, who created jazz, So that kind of got me on a path to doing musicals. From there, I went and I did the Blues Brothers. I remember auditioning, and the director's daughters fell in love with me and everything that I did. And it was because of them that I got hired for the job. And my routine was singing the midnight hour, dancing like James Brown. And that went down a storm through the show, and I got a lot of accolades from the press. It was crazy. I remember women throwing their panties up on stage during my routine. So it was rock and roll and pretty raucous there. And I got to play Jake Blues about a dozen times on stage. But I was a bluette. So I had my own feature bit, but we were primarily to back up the Blues Brothers vocally and doing dance routines. So during this time, whenever I had off time, OSIBISA would call me, I'd do a local gig with them. From the Blues Brothers, I went into the Buddy Holly story, which was a great experience because I got to play. They wanted musicians, they wanted actors who could play instruments. And I played guitar and electric bass in the show. I also learned the valve trombone. It was a great opportunity I got acting. I was featured as the boss of the Harlem Apollo, which Buddy Holly allegedly, he played at the Harlem Apollo because everybody thought Buddy Holly was black. So let me back up again. One of my good friends that I met when I first came to London was a guy named Dominic Miller, who was a songwriting partner of mine. And Dominic and I, when I wasn't out touring, Dominic and I used to do wine bars in Soho in the middle of London. Dominic was an amazing guitarist. He was born in Argentina. He grew up in Argentina, then his family moved to Racine, Indiana, where they make Oshkosh. He played in a soul band when he was 14 there. Then they moved to London. But he was a classical trained guitarist. And he started doing sessions around the time I was doing my first show as Jellyroll Morton. He was doing session. He did a session for Phil Collins on a song called Another Day in Paradise, where his guitar playing, was the feature of the song. It was produced by Hugh Padgham, who, again, is a friend. And Hugh recommended Dominic for Sting. And he got the gig. And he's still with Sting to this day. He's been with Sting for over 35 years. He was the best man at my wedding, my second wedding. And we're still friends to this day. He's still touring with Sting. So I have to back up to that because there's a story to come with that contact. So again, we're back up to the fact that I was in the Buddy Holly story. It was a great run. So that I took a hiatus from acting after the Buddy Holly story to raise my son. I became a single father, and I got a live-in au pair because all of a sudden OSIBISA wanted me to go on tour with them. So I went to South Africa, we toured America, we toured Europe, we recorded an album, we recorded live albums, and I think during this period I also did a vocal session with a guy named Mike Stock and his partner Ekome. Now, there used to be a production team called Stock, Ekome, and Waterman, and that was that team. They did Kylie Minogue, Jason Donovan, they had big hits, and there was a girl named Princess that they first had to hit on, Say I'm Your Number One. And she actually sang with OSIBISA. She had toured with OSIBISA. So I did a record with Mike Stock and Ekome as a session singer. And it was through the offices of Simon Cowell. Simon Cowell of Britain's Got Talent, and what was the show he did in America? Pop Idol. Yeah. So, I mean, I'd done a few things through his office. They know who I am. They hooked me up with Mike Stock. And all this was happening. Then I got a call from my agent. Oh, they're doing a show by a band called The Who, and would you want to have a cameo in it? So I met Pete Townsend before. My mate John Rabbit Bundrick, who I played with in Eric Burton's band, was The Who's keyboard player. And I said, yeah, I love to do this. So I played the part of the specialist, which was, if you ever saw the movie, Jack Nicholson played the specialist. So as the specialist, I had to sing to the star of the show, who was Tommy's mother, a lady by the name of Kim Wilde, who had a hit with We Are the Kids in America. I had to sing to Kim every night as the specialist. And we had a ball. She used to try to corpse me. And in theater terms, corpse means to make you laugh on stage. So I used to sing to her. Her back would be to the stage. And every night she'd try to do something like blow garlic in my face, or look at me cross-eyed, or flash her boobs to me. And it never worked. I never laughed. I always sang to her seriously, because the song I sang was the more operatic song of that rock opera. So I did that show, and I met my second wife. And I have to add that my first wife, Patricia, died when I was doing the Buddy Holly story. No, when I was doing the Blues Brothers in 1991. And that was a very sad. We were separated. Our divorce papers came in on the day that she died. And that was very sad for me. It took me, because I was doing the Blues Brothers, it took me about 3 or 4 years to grieve and recover from that. But I kept working, I had to work. So I think it was 5 years later, I met my second wife. And I had a son by my first wife, and I had 2 sons by my second wife. So, after doing the Who's Tommy, I started doing sessions to look after my family, and touring with OSIBISA. That was the mainstay of, I'm playing pubs whenever I wasn't touring, playing small gigs, but always with my eye on the prize. I did a record. I got offered a chance to work with these Italian producers in the year 2000. And that would go on to spawn a whole bunch of work for me as a singer-songwriter. Now, back up to 1980, I think it was about 87, 88. I met this jazz drummer called Billy Cobham, who wanted to work with me. He wanted me to produce an album for him. But he was my hero. The most famous progressive jazz rock drummer on the planet. So I declined. But 10 years later, almost, I think, 1989, 10 years later, the year 2000, I got a chance to work with these Italian producers. They paid me to do an album of OSIBISA music. Then they paid me to come back and sing and write a bunch of original songs with them. So 2 of the songs, unbeknownst to me, were chosen for Billy Cobham's album. One song called Shadow, which Sony Records loved it, that blew their minds. And that became a minor hit for me. And still, to this day, for Billy Cobham, it's one of his, it was a big hit for him, a minor hit for him. But it's done over 1 million streams on Spotify, even to this day. But yeah, even back then it became a minor hit. So I did that. I did a bunch of recordings. Some of my music appeared on the album of Stanley Jordan, the jazz guitarist. And around this time, I think I did a TV commercial. They took my Sunshine Day OSIBISA song and used it for a TV commercial for a drinks company in Italy. Then I recorded an album. I produced an album. Well, I co-produced my solo album. And one of the songs I did was a song called Lullaby to an Anxious Child. I recorded with Sting and my mate, Dominic Miller. And that became a minor hit for me. But my album, Together as One, I recorded, and that came out on Mango Records through Universal. And the Italians also put it out through their label. More OSIBISA albums followed. I went back to university and I studied for my master's degree in media and culture, cultural studies. So when the change happened in music with the internet and the lack of royalties that musicians were getting, which previously used to take care of them, a lot of musicians' careers faltered. I started teaching, which supplemented my career. I was teaching music, but I was still doing sessions and gigs. I got close to Damon Albarn's organization. I did some gigs with some of the artists that came through Damon Albarn's Musicians Incorporated and the African Express. So that kept my name going out there as a musician. My work with OSIBISA finished in 2015, and I started touring Italy, and as a solo artist based around my solo album. And unbeknownst to me, I got a chance to start touring Russia, where I had a big hit with Shadow, Billy Cobham's recording. I didn't even know, but Shadow was a big hit in Russia. And every musician knew that song. So I started touring Russia 3-4 times a year. It's a huge territory. And that sustained me for 4 or 5 years. I toured Russia from 2016 to 2020. And in 2020, when COVID hit, I got invited back to do a 50th anniversary tour and album for OSIBISA. So I was the principal songwriter. I wrote 11 out of 14 songs on the album. I co-produced it and was fronting the band. Another aspect of my playing, and to do with the Black British musical experience, is, again, which was bands like OSIBISA. There's a whole plethora of musicians. I already mentioned Fuzzy Samuels, who supported American and British rock and roll. You know, there's a whole bunch of musicians that like Reggie Isidore, Roscoe G, who played bass with Traffic. If you look at the Rolling Stones at performance at Hyde Park, they had a whole contingent of African percussionists that played with them. So there's this whole connection with Black British musicians as well. And I tapped certainly in the 80s, I tapped into, and in the 90s, I tapped into the British funk side of things. You had bands like Light of the World, Imagination, Central Line. Just so many bands that came out of Britain during that time. I worked with G. Bello, who was from a band called Light of the World. I produced a record with Desiree and Gabrielle. Again, these are known. Desiree was a huge success in America as a singer. Also, a guy by the name of Roachford, who also sang on a song that I wrote. I wrote a song and produced an album in memory of a young African boy who was murdered in London called Tamilola Taylor. And I got a lot of artists on that album, a lot of black artists, a lot of white artists, Robbie Williams, Damon Albarn and the Gorillaz, Craig David, Miss Dynamite, Mystique. And again, there's, like I said, there's a whole avenue of young British talent, Black British talent, that has to be recognized. Bands like Soul to Soul, they couldn't get arrested here, but they had a huge success in America. Then they became successful here, you know. So Loose Ends is another band. They were huge in America. And they, from their American success, they got more successful here. So I have to give tribute to that side of things, and the fact that there's always been that underpinning of music. It's like Obla Di Obla Da. You know, that was written by a guy named Jimmy Adams. It was an African guy. I can't think of his name now, but he always used to say Obla Di Obla Da. Life goes on, whatever happens. And you know, Paul McCartney and his writing partner John Lennon, they all used to hang out with these guys. They smoke weed, buy their weed, whatever, you know, with these Africans and West Indians. And of course the Rolling Stones. Now the Rolling Stones, if you ever watch a movie called Sympathy for the Devil, it's I think it's done by a French director, but it's the story of the Rolling Stones recording that song interspersed with black activism in Britain during the 60s and 70s, or during the 60s. It's an incredible film, and it shows the dynamic of how a song can change. Because when Mick Jagger when they first did the song, it sounded like a folk song. Please allow me to introduce myself. It sounded like an English, song, it's like very folky. And then they got this African percussionist, Rocky Dizendu, who's from Ghana. Do-do-ka, 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 do-do-ka. All of a sudden, please allow me to introduce just that rhythm alone made it happening, So it like I said, there's this whole group of musicians and artists who supported the British rock and roll and American rock and roll scene, but certainly the British rock and roll scene. And it's amazing how a lot, since the Rolling Stones, since the 60s, that British music has informed world youth culture. So from the time of the Stones and the Beatles, all the way up to dubstep and two-step and jungle and grime, all this music came from the youth culture of Britain. And it still influences youth culture around the world, So now you got this whole Afrobeats culture. Well, I was doing Afrobeat with OSIBISA, 40 years ago. But now they've taken what we did and they've computerized it and sterilized it, and now it's making millions for young African artists, which is great, So I just wanted to, just kind of show a spotlight on some of the artists that I worked with and some of the artists that need to be spotlighted. I'm still producing records. I'm still performing. I've got records coming out. I've got quite a bit on my plate, building a recording studio. So I would say that my career is still going on. I'm, in my mid-70s now. I'm very blessed to still be able to have my wits about me and to still be in this business. And I'd like to thank you, Paul, for having me. And I hope that my story, can inspire some young artists to even more exciting wonders and imaginations and adventures. Thank you so much for having me.